Returned Victorian Liberal leader Matthew Guy has promised to lead with unity and focus on pandemic recovery after ousting Michael O'Brien in a leadership challenge yesterday morning. The change follows months of turbulence, you might say, within the opposition. So joining me live now is Liberal MP Tim Smith. Are you all settled this morning?
Good morning, Laura. How are you?
I'm good. So what's changed today with the new leader?
Well, Matthew's got a very positive plan for Victoria's future, and we've announced, for example, this morning that all children must have access to a mental health specialist. All the students at schools must have access to a mental health specialist, because we know that 1 in 4 Australian kids are suffering from mental health concerns, largely because of these lockdowns, these endless lockdowns where they're having no social interaction with their friends, where they can't go to school. I mean, Victorian kids have been Victorian kids have missed hundreds of days of school since this pandemic began. We've had 6 lockdowns here, more than any other state in the nation. And I know this is occurring in Sydney too, but our kids have missed so much classroom time. This is having a dramatic effect on their mental health. And the Victorian government doesn't seem to care about this. The Victorian chief psychologist doesn't appear at daily press conferences, and I don't think the advice of mental health experts is being taken into account into Victoria's lockdowns. We had the longest lockdown anywhere in the world, and I just don't think those concerns about kids has been taken into account. And we've got to get Year 11s and 12s back to school. I mean, if I was in Year 12 at the moment, I'd be beside myself. Year 12's a pretty hard year at the best of times, but when you're trying to learn through a computer screen and you don't have that social interaction with your friends and with your teachers, it just makes life so much more difficult, and the stress levels are going through the roof. Parents are very concerned, and obviously they're trying to homeschool whilst doing their own jobs. But for adolescents, this is really tough, and we think that this has got to end. We've got to get the kids back in the classroom. We've got to give them access to mental health specialists. There's going to be long-term consequences for the last 2 years of a lack of social interaction for these kids, and we're going to have to fix it.
Well, Michael O'Brien cared about kids too. He was talking about all the things that you were talking about today. So what was it, a personnel problem or a policy one?
Oh, look, there are many issues, as you know, Laura, with when there is a change of leadership, and I'm not going to publicly go into the ins and outs of why I supported Matthew, but the simple fact is that the party room overwhelmingly voted for change. Change has occurred, and Matthew has a very positive plan, not just for now, but to 2023 to get Victoria back on track.
Well, what are those
because
plans?
We have to.
Can I ask you, I mean, we've seen how difficult it is for oppositions in this pandemic era to cut through when you've got premiers holding daily media conferences, but more immediately, instead of criticising Daniel Andrews in a blanket way, are there things that you are focusing in on, and do you have a list of priorities? I mean, for example, a curfew's working. Do you want them to end now?
100% the curfew would go now. If Matthew Guy was the Premier of Victoria, there would be no curfew, because it's not backed by health advice or medical science. It's never been justified. It's not been justified. I might say in New South Wales, I don't think it can be justified. It certainly has never been justified in Victoria. And I might note the New South Wales Labor Party is calling for it to be abolished in the LGAs in Sydney, where it's currently being applied to. We've been requesting the health advice now for 18 months to be supplied to MPs and to the public, and it hasn't been.
Indeed.
And the justification for the curfew has never been provided.
Well, have you been dudded there in Victoria out of Pfizer vaccines?
No, I've seen the back and forth yesterday. That was just a stunt from Daniel Andrews, frankly. He just tried to pick a fight. It was a diversion, a typical Daniel Andrews diversion. These vaccines are being dished out, as it were, on a per capita basis. Obviously, there was a requirement in New South Wales some months ago for emergency vaccines, as you would expect.
Yeah.
Vaccines are being rolled out on a per
emergency
capita.
Vaccines here in New South Wales. We do have more than we originally got. We've had extra allocation because there have been the outbreak. But, for example, with a Liberal government at a state level in Victoria, do you think you would have done better on the vaccine front?
I think Victoria and New South Wales are having vaccines delivered to them on a per capita basis from the federal government. And I've done some due diligence on this over the last 24 hours, and I am greatly reassured that Victoria is getting its fair share, as it should be. vaccines should be dished out on a per capita basis as they are. And what Daniel Andrews did yesterday, I mean, yesterday's question time in the Victorian Parliament was ridiculous. I mean, it's the Andrews Labor government spent the entire time trying to blame the federal government for everything.
Well, at least you've got a parliament up and running once again. So, you know, the business of parliament is continuing. But can I just finally ask you, because, you know, we've all become pretty parochial during COVID. It's kind of a state versus state thing going on. So what would a Liberal Victorian government at a state level mean? Would that mean that you would have bigger fights with the Commonwealth? You'd work more collaboratively? Would you get more out of the Commonwealth? Or is Labor getting it because they're kicking up a stink?
We have a national plan and national cabinet process. I'm very concerned that the Andrews government will go rogue on those benchmarks and indeed that plan, as we've seen other Labor premiers, I might say possibly at least one Liberal premier as well. We believe in the national plan. We believe that this country is one country and we should all work together to get through this mess as quickly as we possibly can. And we've got a national plan. We're going to stick to that plan because it's a good plan that's been endorsed by both sides of politics on the best medical advice available to us from the Dudded Institute. So I call on the premiers to stick to the plan and for everyone to remember that we're Australians first.
Tim Smith, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Laura.